I'm going to go ahead and give you permission to slow down your reading. Now, I know there's a lot of pressure on you to read as many books as you can, as fast as you can, especially if you're in college, if you're in seminary, if you're a pastor like me. Almost every book you pick off the shelf, you look at the recommendations in the front of the book and it says every pastor needs to read this book, etc., and so forth. If you are academically inclined, if you're sort of in the intellectual world, let's say you're a professor or a teacher or you're in business or whatever your trade or profession is, there's probably an expectation upon you that you read all of the best books as they come out. And what I'm going to do in this video is argue the opposite. I'm going to argue that you actually slow down your readings and strive instead for comprehension. Now, let me show you here. This is Craig from Instagram. He's got a page called Reformed in Reading. And man, I got to admit, this page incites a lot of coveting in my heart because I look at all of these incredible books and I think to myself, oh, I need to get this one. I need to get that one. That one looks amazing. This one looks awesome. But I think there is a better way. I think it's the way of John Piper. Now, John Piper, Baptist, pastor, scholar, theologian, right? I appreciate very much his work. He one time said that he cannot read any faster than he can actually speak the words out loud. He thinks that he has almost like some kind of a learning disability there, that he just can't read fast. But I think that might actually be a superpower in that it drives your comprehension up through the roof even. So play out the scenario with me. So let's say that you have a reading rate of X. You can read X number of pages per minute. Okay, great. And let's set your comprehension standard at 100%. Now, I do not mean that you're understanding 100% of the material that's in the reading. What I mean is that's your average comprehension. So let's just establish that from the get-go. I'm not saying you understand everything, but that's your level of comprehension as you read at the rate of X. Well, what would happen if you reduced your rate of X to 75%? Well, your comprehension level would boost up to 125%. So is that worth it? Is it worth it slowing down by 25% so that your comprehension rate jumps up 25%? I think it probably would make sense. In fact, if you were to slow down to a rate of 50%, half the speed at which you read right now, then your comprehension rate would double to 200%. You'd understand twice as good as you do right now. I think that makes a pretty strong argument. Now, let me show you a friend of mine. This is John Marco. He is one of the professors at Cornerstone. In fact, he's one of the deans there. John Marco, I actually grew up with him, went to kindergarten together, etc. It's a long story. But he became the best John Locke scholar in the entire world. In fact, when his dissertation and his book on John Locke came out, it actually flipped over the scholarly consensus on some of the foundational understandings of what Lockean scholars had held heretofore. Well, how did he do that? Well, what happened is that many people who were reading and writing on John Locke, they skimmed his works, and then they really read the secondary and tertiary sources. But what happened there is that they were essentially just mimicking and mocking each other, repeating some of the same old things. So what John did is he set aside the secondary and tertiary literature for another day, and instead he read John Locke very, 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 very carefully. In fact, what he did is he made an outline of every single book that he read of John Locke's first sources, all right? So I asked him one day, I was in his office, I'm like, man, doesn't that make you incredibly slow? Perhaps it does, but if you're going to specialize in a particular area, then it does make sense to really, really strain towards comprehension rather than reading speed. So I actually started doing that myself in my Edwards studies, and I want to show you this. So this is my outline of one of Edwards' books, A Faithful Narrative, from Volume 4 of the works of Jonathan Edwards. And I started doing the same thing. I started making a full outline of everything, including the introduction, and a lot of it is copy and paste from online because Edwards' works are online. But I made an entire outline of every single one of Edwards' major points and minor points. And what happened then was that, again, my comprehension of the book went through the roof. Now, of course, it took me twice, 3 times, 4 times as long to actually read the thing, but I fully understood it. And so when I was going to prepare some lectures on Edwards, I had a much closer case to saying I've mastered understanding of this. Now, again, I don't think there's 100% comprehension because You can never really get yourself into the mind of a particular author, but you can certainly understand the drive of the book much better than had you not done otherwise. Now, here's another thing that I've picked up, and I realize that this picture is not very good, but when I was in college and then graduate school and then during my doctoral studies as well, I began to make my own index in the front or the back of every single book I read. Okay, so every time I'm reading a book, I go to a blank page, either the front or the back, and I notate what it is that was important in that book. And so I've created my own index. Now, there are, of course, indexes in such books, but to have your own index is even better. So yesterday, I was going through this book that I'd read when I was doing my doctoral studies, and I was able to skim through the entire book in about 3 or 4 hours, gleaning all of the insights from the first time I'd read the book. And it actually feels, if I'm completely honest, it feels like I've got something like a cheat code because I'm doing work so much more efficiently than I had if I hadn't made those indexes in the front. Okay, so that's another thing that you can do that's really going to increase your comprehension as you go. Now, one more thing that I just want to share with you here is, of course, that if you're going to read slower, then you're going to be able to read less books. And that is the downside, of course, to slackening your pace as you read. But that's also a challenge because what I think that does for you is it allows you the opportunity to focus on the very best books that have been written. And this is why I made this series right here, the top 100 books. So I made 4 such videos where I looked at the top 100 books, at least according to my own opinion. That's subjective, of course, wildly subjective even. But I have 4 videos where I take you through what I think are the top 100 books of all time. This video right here happens to be the 25 to 1 books, and I think that you could probably glean a lot from that if you did something very similar. All right, so you have permission to slow down your readings. You have permission from me to increase your comprehension, make it go through the roof. And by the way, if you're interested in looking for a book that you might want to read nice and slowly, here's my book, Theology of Joy, Jonathan Edwards, and Eternal Happiness in the Holy Trinity, which now is on Audible as well. So physical book and Kindle aside, you can listen to this book fully on Audible if you're driving or if you're working in the kitchen or if you're working out on the patio or whatever you've got going on in your life. You'll want to check that out. I put that in the description, link in the description of this video. By the way, if you like my Marry a Woman Who Reads Her Bible shirt, I'll put a link to that as well. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for checking into this particular channel. I do love you lots, and we'll talk to you later.